Father, we thank you for this moment in time that God has given us. And Lord, as we go into our next segment of building a prayer closet, Lord, teach us the partners that are appropriately lined up with prayer. So Lord, help us to take these things, teach us how to pray as our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen.
Amen. All right. Last week we talked about prayer's partner, and the first one being waiting, watching.
Watch.
Yeah, so watch being the partner, that first partner, the partner of the prayer. Watch is one of those partners that you should keep with you all the time. Today's partner we're going to talk about is fasting. And it was really funny, I was telling Elder Nelson on the way in, I don't know what was going on, but I was up half the night and just not feeling well. But in the midst of all that, it's like in, the 1, 2 o'clock time frame is when the Lord really begins to speak and manifest a lot of things. I just didn't even feel well enough to turn over, so if it doesn't come out to you, I got ministered to, but I won't say selfishly that. But the thing about this whole thing about fasting, and because the Bible speaks of that, and why is fasting so important? Fasting is defined as to abstain from food, to eat only sparingly or certain kinds of food, especially as a religious observance. And again, this is, if you will, the Webster definition of what fasting is. Fasting, though, is not some blank check that you give to God when you want something. Again, fasting is not some blank check that you write out to God when you want to get something. It's not even for the purpose of losing weight when you think of fasting. Also, Daniel and Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the Daniel diet is not fasting. Because people will talk about that whole thing of, I'm doing a Daniel fast. If you, and even, let me just speak to that since I'm on film. Okay, I'll keep you get mad. The piece of the Daniel fast is this, and this is where people really get thrown off. With Daniel and the 3 Hebrew boys, when you read the story about what was going on with them, when they were brought before the king, and these 4 young men were kind of sized up against everybody else. They refused to eat, if you will, the diet that was of the Babylonians during that time. And it was thought that if you didn't do that, then they would get smaller and be weaker and what have you. And the case being is that was not true, because again, God sustained them based on the things that he had told Israel, or really told people to eat and not what to eat, what not to eat. Again, when you look in Deuteronomies, and it will give you, the list of clean meats, unclean meats. Again, I won't get into a lot of that because, again, a lot of that has to deal with the issues that we deal with nowadays in terms of health and various things that go on. Not that that's going to get you into heaven or hell, but again, we have a responsibility to our bodies, and this is the reason why the Lord had outlined these things as far as the clean meat and the unclean meat. So again, the 3 Hebrew boys and Daniel took it upon themselves to follow that strict diet, and because of that, they were healthier. So again, this was a lifestyle, it was not a diet. So, or not a fast, if you will, that people, because everybody, come first of the year, I'm going to do a Daniel fast and Daniel cleanse. No, if you're going to do it, then it's a lifestyle. And really it has nothing to do, if you will, with the spirituality of it bringing you closer to God, if you will, because I will put this on record, people may or may not know this, Adolf Hitler was a vegetarian. So again, he may have even been a vegan, I would have to look at that, but I know I'm safe by knowing that he was a vegetarian. So I need not even say any more about Adolf Hitler, again, with that whole thing. So if it was about diet and dieting getting you closer to God, you surmise what you want out of it. Again, I'm not going to make any accusations over that. So again, so when we think about this whole thing of fasting and praying, when is it appropriate for the use of that? This partner is not one to be hung out with all the time. So whereas Jesus talked about last week that we ought to watch and pray, with fasting, this partner you don't hang out with all the time. The reason why I say that, do you have certain people in your life that you enjoy hanging out with all the time, and other folks you kind of take them only sparingly? It's like, okay, I can only do you for so long. And it's not to accuse fasting of being a type of partner that's a drag, but it's just, and this is where the Lord gave it to me, it's necessary to keep watch close, but fasting, but not fasting because of their functionalities. So when you think about the functionality of watch, men ought to always pray and not faint. You ought to be aware of your surroundings. You ought to be watching what's going on. You ought to be watching the events of the world. We ought to be mindful of the things that are going on in our conversation and in our praying with God. And let me even stop there, because the Lord stopped me in the middle of the night and just dealt on this piece. I don't mean to veer off, but I still have to talk about, because when we think about prayer, fasting and praying, and I know I may have said this one time before, but it was like the Lord underscored this again. Prayer was not even meant to be. Again, prayer is, we had to establish this line of communication because we lost communication with God. So if you notice, even when you look at Enoch, it never really talks about him praying to God. Enoch establishes this relationship with God. And because of that, then the Lord has this daily dialogue that happens with him. So I submit to you, even, the thing, as we think about praying again was not supposed to be this means of communicating with God. It was supposed to be a one-on-one relationship as Adam had with God. But because of sin put a distance between us. If you will, sin sent us to another country. We are able now to communicate with individuals like Elder Nelson was talking about, having talked with his mother, or, again, through the means of social media or other things. We now have means of communicating with other people that are not right in front of our face. If you will, a strong or healthy prayer life is just like you having FaceTime. Yes, I'm not there with him, but if the heart is right and I can see God through a clean heart, then I can FaceTime with him as I'm communicating with him. If not, then I just have to talk with him and there's no FaceTime. But I'm able to communicate. But again, it's not like, it's funny, I go out to Hoffman Estates twice a week. The second one was a self-inflicted wound, I'll put it like that, because the individuals that I deal with in Hoffman Estates, that's like my base of people that I communicate with. Well, through the wonders of modern technology, you've got phone meetings, you can Skype, you can send instant messaging. You really don't need to be face-to-face with individuals you communicate with. Minister Nelson, in his travels, and just don't think that he jumps up and goes to India. He's in contact with these folks, I'm not sure how often, but still, he talks to them. I mean, it's not like he just shows up and nobody knows who Eric is, and they're in India, but yet you have this conversation. There's a weekly meeting I have with a gentleman that's in India. It's a group of people, they're from Deloitte. It's a group of people that sit over there. He's kind of like the team lead. We walk through stuff. And, we talk, Shifter, that's my buddy. We talk as if, we know each other, we've seen each other, because we've established that rapport relationship and, talk about things and, blah, blah. But I've never seen him, but yet I've communicated with him. Likewise it is with prayer and with God and the things that we do. This is our means of communicating, but this was not God's ideal way of communicating with us. So because of that, the prayer partners that come along with that have to assist or usher during certain times depending on what's going on with the conversation. So I don't know if I've established a baseline with that, but these were all the things that the Lord would kind of, walking me through with this whole thing of fasting and praying. And I'm jumping at the bit because I want to hurry up and get at it, but I want to make sure I lay context to it. So again, it's necessary to keep watch close, but fasting not all the time because of their functionality. So when is fasting appropriate to have as a prayer partner? Think of it like using a hatchet to cut butter. You use it only when the job calls for it. And again, you might have, sharp, and I said hatchet, which is probably extreme, but you got like these Jingyu knives and all these stuff, the big, chopping knives and what have you. Even the long knives, you wouldn't use a 10-inch, blade or even a serrated knife, serrated edge knife to cut butter. It's like you're doing an overkill. This is what, again, when you think about fasting and praying, you only use it when it's necessary to use it. Again, this was, and again, the whole thing that the Lord was bringing to me, because this thing got to be, in terms of fasting, it became ritualistic among among the Jewish people. Because remember the man that went up to prayer with the publican, and he says, I fast twice a week. I know when I was growing up, and some stuff you do, I'll say it, because you're ignorant. You just don't know any better. This is what you were taught. I was looking for something more politically correct, a nicer term, but it is what it is. So, you would fast on Wednesdays and Fridays. Oh, we fasted. But then, and nobody asked, what are you fasting for? Again, fasting, and I don't want to belittle it or make it seem less than what it is. It has its purpose when it has its purpose. Yes, sir. When it does not, you are just going through the motion of ritualistic stuff. The Jews, again, the whole thing with the law, the reason why Paul talks so much about the law in Romans is because what they did, they took the core 10 commandments that God wrote with his finger. Then they crafted all this stuff around the core of it, of man-made stuff. It was stuff they put in, you can only walk a quarter of a mile on Sabbath. It didn't say that. But yet they put all this infrastructure in place, and it's like the more stuff you put on it, the more you got to put on top of it to justify why you did that. So there's all this crazy. So likewise, I believe, even, and granted, the Old Testament talks about the fast that the Lord had called for, but God is not calling for a fast every day. Watching, you need to make sure you on your P's and Q's, but this whole thing with fasting, if you will, the denying, the abstaining of foods was for a reason. You will find even those in the Old Testament, when you look at Daniel, when he had besought God for an answer, and it said that 21 days he was there and he prayed and was without food, and his countenance failed him. In other words, he was so weak, he didn't have energy enough to get up. Again, his was sitting there because he's beseeching God. Because again, when you put context around it, the Lord showed him the events of what was and what would come to the end. So he's like, I need to understand this. So again, this was not the hatchet with the knife situation. This was like, okay, I really need something from the Lord, and I need to step outside myself because I need to understand Lord, what is it that you're trying to show me? In Matthew 17 through 21, Jesus says this. He said, then Jesus answered and said, O faithless and perverse generation, how long shall I be with you? How long shall I suffer you? Bring him hither to me. And Jesus reached the devil, Jesus rebuked the devil, and he departed out of him. And the child was cured from the very hour. Then came the disciples to Jesus apart and said, why couldn't we cast him out? Jesus said unto him, because of your unbelief. For verily, I say unto you, if you have faith as a grain of mustard seed, you shall say unto this mountain, remove hence to yonder place, and it shall be removed, and nothing shall be impossible unto you. Howbeit, this kind goeth out but by fasting and praying. So this was kind of the whole nuclei, if you will, of the thought behind partnering up with prayer, this whole fasting piece. Let me give you context to the story if you don't remember it. What was going on in this story? It was this man whose son was vexed with devils. And the man asked the disciples to rebuke, to heal their son and, rebuke the devil out of him. In the meantime, Jesus had taken Peter, James, and John up to the mountain. Elisha and Moses revealed themselves along with Jesus and, showed themselves to the three. So then, after that, Peter's like, it's good for us to be here. Let's build 3 tabernacles. And all they saw was Jesus only after they looked away, and that's all who was there. Again, in that, even establishing that, what was going on there was Jesus came to fulfill all the law and the prophets. So again, when you look at, you had the head of the school of prophet, which was Elisha, and then you had the lawgiver, who was Moses. So again, in Jesus fulfilling the scripture, these two appeared along there with him, but it left, again, the whole thing with, but after all said and done, it's still all built upon Jesus and Jesus only. So then they come back down. And in the meantime, the other 9 are down there arguing about who's greatest in the kingdom. So again, we get caught up in our foolishness while some work of the Lord really needs to be done and executed. So again, Jesus comes down and he's like, okay, you slow of hearts. And again, he was really aggravated at this point. And it's like, okay, these only go by fasting and prayer. Because they're like, why couldn't we do it? Let me add context to that. Because, again, and this was the whole thing, I guess, praise God, about being sick last night. Because God began to give me I went down the rabbit hole and started thinking more and more, okay, well, what really was going on here? Because if you notice, Jesus really did not speak to them about fasting and praying. Let me kind of, again, even in context with Jesus, he himself executes the 40-day, fasting for 40 days because he goes into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil, John 3. So, it talks about that. So he goes there with purpose of, maybe it was John 4. Anyway, or Matthew's. Anyway, I believe it was John. In Luke 10, though, with this whole thing with the disciples and what he had just said to them in Matthew's 17. Luke 10, and again, what you have to realize, because, in trying to run the stories parallel, because there's some other stuff that I'm going to get to as well. In Luke 10, Jesus sends them out. And in 10:17, they make this statement. The 70 returned, saying with joy, returned again with joy, saying, Lord, even the devils are subject unto us through thy name. That should raise a flag in somebody's mind of, okay, they were casting out devils and they came back rejoicing. And again, from there, 18, on talks about, don't rejoice because the devils obeyed you, but rejoice because your name is written in heaven. So again, he adds context to what the devil this whole thing with fasting and praying. It's like, okay, I gave you power. I sent you out with power. You had it. You executed on it. Why in this case, though, again, in Matthew 17, and again, when you kind of run the stories parallel, even though it seems like a later time in Matthew's, this really had happened prior to this incident. So the crazy thing around all this is like, okay, well, why couldn't we rebuke this devil there, but yet we go out and we're rebuking these other ones? This provides, or this proves that they had power over the devils. What happened? Why did they need to fast to get rid of these other demons? There are other factors at work in the 17th chapter of Matthew. This guy's got, again, multiple demons, and there's self-distraction. It's almost like what they talked about with Irma, Harvey, and Jose. You have like the perfect storm with this water churning in warm water. They're saying, the water, is in the 80s, and, the warmer the water, the stronger the churn. Likewise, because you had this man's child that had these multiple things going on, these devils that he had in him, and they were distracted by self-stuff. Who's going to be greatest in the kingdom? He's saying because of that, when you become focused on you and not Jesus, then it's time to deal with you. That's what all this is about, is, okay, in terms of the fasting and the prayer. When you look at fasting and what it does, and I had wrote this down a couple of weeks ago because the Lord had said this to me. Fasting prepares you for the struggle, because there are experiences between the ask and the answer. Let me say that again. Fasting prepares you for the struggle, because there are experiences you will face between the ask and the answer. Again, Jesus, and again, this is not just put there just because. Jesus, in the Bible says, goes into the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. I'm pulling up the scripture now. I believe it is John 3. Now I'm going to go to 4, because I think it's 4. Nope, it's John 3. Nope, it's not. Let's go Matthew 4. I'm positive. Yep. And it says that, and this was after the baptism with John in Matthew 3. In Matthew 4, 1, then Jesus, then was Jesus led up into the spirit in the wilderness to be tempted of the devil. And when he had fasted 40 days and 40 nights and were hunger, then the temptation came to him, and he said, the devil, if thou be the Son of God, then turn these stones into bread. I'm going to stop there. Just, I wanted to bring that up because, again, it says for 40 days that he went purposely to be tempted of the devil. Because, again, I believe that it is John that put it like this. He said, all that is in the world is the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eye, and the pride of life. Jesus was then tempted on all 3 points. And again, I think it was Paul that talked about him being tempted on every point, but yet he did not give in. Lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. Again, when you think about the whole thing with the model prayer and teach us how to conversate, this is one piece that he's saying we're going to have to deal with it. But when you deal with it, that's the most powerful piece in terms of when you partner up with fasting, it needs to be to bring yourself, to bring the flesh under subjection for what God needs to do. Fasting preps you for ministry. And it's not about, I'm Reverend so-and-so, or Elder so-and-so, or Minister so-and-so, or Bishop so-and-so. Everybody is to minister for the Lord. So when you look at preparing you for ministry, how are you going to deal with being able to be a representative for the Lord. Here's the thing about it. Whenever they're prepping you to be an ambassador, if you're going to be an ambassador to that country, you need to understand the ways of that country. They need to school you in what traditions you need to do, what you don't, the do's and the don'ts. Like, people don't know. It was funny when I was going over to Singapore. They said, don't chew gum. You are not allowed to chew gum, because if you chew gum and spit it out on the sidewalk, they will take you to jail. That's law. If you don't know, and here's the thing about it, ignorance does not curtail the penalty. You can say, I didn't know. You can plead it, but it's like, hey, it's the law of the land. You didn't know, you should have asked somebody. This is what, again, when we think about Jesus, and even after this point, I looked at it, I searched for it, you don't find Jesus fasting anymore. It's just not in the New Testament. I could not find it. It's not there. I know Paul talks later about fasting. He gets into some things around, if you will, the rules of engagement around fasting, if you're going to take this and partner it up with prayer. But again, you need to understand, why are you fasting? There are people that, okay, well, now we're going to fast. It's our annual time of fasting. What are you doing it for? This is not like Christmas time. Okay, I was telling everybody, I was in Sam's Club and they got the Christmas stuff out already. I'm like, wow, really? But everybody knows it's coming. And it's like, okay, here it comes. There ought not to be that kind of party. Again, it should not be ritualistic in that, now it's our time to fast. Everybody, first of the year, we're going to do the Daniel fast, or we're going to do this, 40-day fast where we came from and grew up. And it's like, why are you doing it? And does it make you better?
Yes, sir.
And if it's not making you better, why? So you did 40 days or 21 days, you lost weight. And that's about all you got out of it. Because spiritually, what did it do for you? It ought to be an enhancement around your spiritual life. Look at the order. Jesus is baptized of John. He goes into the wilderness to be tempted for 40 days. Then he starts ministry. So all of it had a purpose. Don't do stuff just to be doing stuff. Don't follow the lead just because that's what everybody else is doing. When I first got here and started pastoring, that was one of the things. Ooh, y'all ain't fasting. I'm like, because God didn't get that to me. And what is the purpose around that? Listen, not to throw anybody off, where I came from, it had purpose. I saw where it had purpose. It was for a reason. But after the reasoning was done and over with, and it got to be real ritualistic, it stopped working.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Fasting is not some genie that you go and rub and the genie comes out and you're like, okay, what do you want? Like I said, fasting is not this blank check. To me, if you going to hell, then at least go on a full stomach. I mean, don't just fast, I'm going to fast and blah, blah. Because even with this, it's about afflicting your flesh. I mean, we've even, got into, let's, fast from the media, or fast from TV, or fast from using the iPad and all that stuff. Well, you know what? Even with that, I'm even like, okay, whatever. Because what you're doing, it ought to be drawing you closer to God. If something is acting as a hurdle or a block or a roadblock and you can't get around that, fasting's appropriate. Because like, Lord, I can't break the chain on that. That's why he said, these only go by fasting and prayer. And look at what the word says. The word says, ye shall receive power after that the Holy Ghost has come. So if you got power, it's like, then use the power. You got something in your way, use the power. Get on up out of my way. But again, and it's not some things, sometimes your faith will be challenged in that what you have in you. It's like, I'm a child of the 60s and what have you, and I will admit this, and somebody may say, that's the devil. But I like watching Bewitched. It comes on, and I look at Samantha's powers, and and it's like, again, I know that it is what it is, and it ain't real, and blah blah. But and there was one episode to where she lost her powers. Then she had to do some stuff. you do get to a place sometimes where you can seemingly lose power. It's like God has not left. It's almost like when you look at the situation in Florida, there's some down power lines, but there's some power lines that are not down that affect other people's power, and they don't have power.
Mm-hmm.
They're working to get it up,
Mm-hmm.
but what they had to do was look at it, clear the trees, let me clear the stuff that's on the line and set it back up. Sometimes you will have stuff that will fall on you, and you have to take a saw, take the hatchet,
Yes, sir.
take fasting, and clear it. Once it's cleared, now I can put it back up. And with us, we expect when we walk in here, I know the bill's paid, flip the switch, I know the light should come on, because the power should be clear. When I turned this thing on, I knew I charged it up, like it better work.
Amen.
That's the way fasting is. Fasting prepares your flesh for that. What? Its defeat. So fasting prepares itself for the flesh to be defeated. 40 days, why? 40 stripes equaled death. Remember with Jesus and even Paul, he was beat 39 times. Paul said, I was beat 40 times save one. Because if they had hit me the 40th time, it would have been death. Jesus just does not just pull 40 out of nowhere. Moses, again, in that whole thing of killing who he was, 40 years had to dwell in the wilderness. They say it takes 21 days to break a habit, but 40 days to kill it. They didn't say that, I'm saying it. Because I know with the 40 stripes, it equals death. 40 days of fasting will kill your flesh. And here's the thing about it. How do we know that that's true? Look at Jesus after 40 days. Again, not to romanticize any of this, Jesus now has fasted 40 days in the wilderness, which I started thinking about. I'm like, okay, if he's going 40 days with nothing, by the time it's done, the devil shows up. The first thing he says, why don't you turn that stone into bread? You think that did not sound like a good idea? Because I remember, as a child, when we come off, the whole 40 day, and sometimes we would go like 3 days straight with nothing. They would call this like a 40-day denial. So, it's like you're doing a 12-hour stint. So after the 12 hours, then you look, oh, where's the food at? And I remember sometime over a weekend, we would do like a whole 3 days with nothing. Come the third day, you were so weak, you couldn't hardly move. Yet the natural man, but spiritually, it's like, okay, now you can kind of start